In the mid-1980s, Mikhail Gorbachev faced the Soviet Union grappling with deep economic stagnation and growing social apathy. Instead of launching broad, disruptive reforms simultaneously, a different path began to unfold. During this period, starting around 1986, Perestroika was introduced more cautiously. Initial efforts focused on specific industrial sectors, allowing factory managers greater autonomy and experimenting with limited market incentives, drawing inspiration from earlier Hungarian models. Simultaneously, Glasnost was strategically channeled. Rather than unleashing wide-ranging criticism of the Soviet past, its focus narrowed onto combating bureaucratic corruption and inefficiency. Highly publicized anti-corruption campaigns targeted unpopular officials, providing an outlet for public frustration without fundamentally challenging the system's legitimacy. As events unfolded in 1988, the policy towards dissent was subtly adjusted. While outright political opposition remained constrained, greater latitude was given to cultural expression and discussion of social problems, aiming to build a sense of shared effort in renewal. Recognizing the potent force of nationalism, Gorbachev initiated negotiations for a new Union treaty far earlier than historically occurred, beginning serious discussions in late 1988. He offered significant economic and cultural concessions to republics like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania preemptively, seeking to co-opt moderate nationalist sentiments. Throughout 1989, the focus remained dual: controlled economic tinkering and political negotiation. Small-scale private enterprises, primarily in the service sector, were cautiously permitted under state supervision. The negotiation process for the Union Treaty dominated internal politics, presented as a necessary modernization, not a dissolution. In the year 1990, a breakthrough seemed possible. A draft Union of Sovereign States Treaty proposed a significantly decentralized structure. Republics would gain control over vast internal resources and policies, while Moscow retained authority over defense, foreign affairs, and a core economic framework, including the currency. Key figures, perhaps sensing the potential for chaos otherwise, were gradually brought on board through careful negotiation and compromise. Subsequently, the critical juncture of August 1991 arrived under different circumstances. With a viable treaty framework already gaining traction across most republics and the economy showing tentative signs of stabilization in consumer goods availability due to targeted reforms, the conditions for a hardline coup were less fertile. Potential plotters within the military and KGB found insufficient support, viewing the proposed treaty as a difficult but necessary compromise to preserve influence, rather than opting for a high-risk confrontation. During this period, the attempted coup either fizzled out before truly starting or was rapidly contained with minimal disruption, leaving Gorbachev's political standing weakened but intact, unlike the historical outcome which fatally undermined central authority. As the 1990s progressed, the reformed Union, perhaps renamed the Union of Sovereign Soviet Republics or a similar title, persisted. It operated as a much looser confederation, grappling constantly with internal tensions between Moscow and the republics, and navigating a complex path of slow, state-managed economic liberalization. The catastrophic collapse was averted, replaced by a prolonged period of adaptation and internal negotiation, leaving a transformed, yet still existing, Soviet entity on the world stage into the 21st century. Following the successful negotiation and ratification of the Union of Sovereign States Treaty, around late 1991 or early 1992, the political landscape fundamentally shifted. Republics now wielded substantial autonomy over their internal affairs, managing local economies, education, and cultural policies. Moscow's role contracted, primarily focusing on coordinating defense, managing the nuclear arsenal, conducting unified foreign policy, and maintaining the integrity of the internal market and the ruble zone. The Communist Party, likely undergoing significant rebranding and internal reform, retained influence but operated within a more complex power-sharing arrangement with Republican leaderships. Throughout the mid-1990s, the economic situation remained challenging. The transition away from central planning, even managed cautiously, caused disruptions. Some republics, particularly those with valuable natural resources like Russia or Kazakhstan, adapted more readily to managing their own economic affairs within the Union framework. Others, more dependent on subsidies, struggled. During this period, limited private enterprise continued to expand, especially in retail and services, alleviating some consumer shortages but also creating visible wealth disparities. Foreign investment remained tentative, deterred by the complex political structure and bureaucratic hurdles, though joint ventures in resource extraction saw some success. Socially, cultural expression flourished within republican boundaries, often emphasizing distinct national identities. However, these expressions were generally kept within the bounds agreed upon in the Union Treaty, preventing overt secessionist movements from gaining unstoppable momentum, as Moscow retained levers of influence through economic ties and security oversight. As events unfolded towards the end of the 1990s, political power became increasingly decentralized. Strong regional leaders emerged within the larger republics, negotiating assertively with the central government in Moscow. Figures analogous to Boris Yeltsin might still rise within Russia, but their power base would be primarily within the Russian Republic itself, counterbalanced by leaders in Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and others within the Union structure. Internationally, the survival of a reformed Soviet entity altered the global balance. The expansion of NATO likely proceeded more cautiously. Former Warsaw Pact countries still sought Western integration, but the process faced a different geopolitical reality, with a large, albeit decentralized, power bloc remaining to their east. By the year 2000, this alternate Soviet Union was not the superpower of old, nor the collection of fully independent states' history records. It existed as a vast, complex, often internally fractious confederation, navigating a unique path between state control and regional autonomy, still grappling with the legacy of its past but having avoided complete disintegration. Entering the early 2000s, the political dynamics within the Union of Sovereign States were characterized by continuous negotiation. The central authority, likely still led by Gorbachev initially, though perhaps facing challenges or succession by this point, constantly balanced competing republican interests. Economic performance varied significantly across the Union. Resource-rich republics like Russia and Kazakhstan used their relative wealth to assert greater influence and pursue more independent economic policies, sometimes creating friction with Moscow over revenue sharing and infrastructure projects. Poorer republics remained more reliant on central coordination and fiscal transfers. During this period, the technological gap with the West persisted, although targeted investments in specific sectors like aerospace or energy might have kept the Union competitive in niche areas. The slow pace of broader market reforms constrained innovation and overall productivity growth compared to rapidly developing nations elsewhere. Socially, republican identities solidified further. While secession was off the table due to the treaty framework and Moscow's residual security influence, cultural autonomy led to distinct national narratives flourishing. Education systems increasingly emphasized local languages and histories, sometimes presenting challenges to a unified Union identity. Internationally, the Union of Sovereign States acted as a significant counterweight in global affairs, albeit less ideologically driven than its predecessor. It likely maintained complex relationships with China, sometimes cooperating, sometimes competing for influence in Central Asia. Relations with the West remained guarded, marked by periods of cooperation on specific issues like counterterrorism, alternating with tensions over spheres of influence, particularly concerning Eastern Europe. As events unfolded around 2005, the internal political scene might have seen leadership transitions both in Moscow and key republics. New generations of leaders, raised within the Confederation framework, would navigate its inherent complexities, perhaps pushing for further decentralization or attempting limited recentralization, depending on prevailing economic and security concerns. Throughout the first decade of the 21st century, this alternate Soviet entity would represent a unique geopolitical player. Neither the monolithic bloc of the Cold War nor the fragmented landscape of our timeline, it presented a persistent, complex challenge to international order, defined by its internal diversity and the ongoing negotiation between its constituent parts and the central authority. By the late 2000s, the Union of Sovereign States faced new external pressures, notably the global financial crisis starting in 2008. The impact was uneven across the Confederation. Republics heavily reliant on exporting commodities like oil and gas experienced sharp, though temporary, downturns. Others with more diversified, internally focused economies weathered the storm slightly better, highlighting the economic fragmentation within the Union framework. During this period, energy politics became increasingly central. Russia, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan leveraged their vast reserves, negotiating complex transit and pricing agreements both within the Union and with external partners like Europe and China. This created internal dependencies and occasional disputes over pipeline routes and revenue distribution, testing the Union's cooperative mechanisms. Subsequently, leadership styles began to diverge more noticeably. Some Republican leaders consolidated power, adopting more authoritarian governance models within their territories, often justifying these moves by citing the need for stability or protection against external interference. The Central Moscow Authority had limited capacity to intervene unless core Union treaties were directly violated. Internal security remained a key function of the central apparatus, coordinating efforts against cross-border crime and potential extremist threats originating from regions bordering volatile zones like Afghanistan. Cooperation and intelligence sharing was often smoother than economic coordination, given the shared perceived threats. Internationally, the Union maintained a cautious stance. It likely viewed events like the Arab Spring, beginning around 2010, with considerable apprehension, wary of instability spreading near its southern borders or inspiring dissent internally. Its foreign policy continued to emphasize multipolarity, seeking partnerships to counterbalance perceived Western dominance. As the 2010s dawned, the Union of Sovereign States was a study in managed complexity. It had survived, adapted, and maintained a unique geopolitical presence, yet faced perpetual internal negotiations and the ongoing challenge of reconciling diverse national aspirations within a single, albeit loose, political structure. The legacy of Gorbachev's alternate path was not stability in the old sense, but rather a persistent, evolving balancing act.